This is the Everyday AI Show, the everyday podcast where we simplify AI and bring its power to your fingertips. Listen daily for practical advice to boost your career, business, and everyday life.
It seems like we just got used to large language models, but now we're hearing more and more about small language models. Like, what the heck? What are small language models? What's the difference between them and the big large language models? And when should we be using small models? We're going to answer those questions today and more on Everyday AI. Welcome. What's going on, y'all? My name is Jordan Wilson, and I am the host of Everyday AI. And this is for you. We are a daily live stream, podcast, and free daily newsletter helping everyday people like you and me not just learn what's going on with generative AI, but how we can all actually leverage all of this information to grow our companies and to grow our careers. And I think, the more and more prevalent generative AI becomes in our day-to-day lives, using in the workplace, we have to become more comfortable with all of these, buzzwords and all of these acronyms, right? So if you're not already using large language models or small language models in your day-to-day at work, and you live and work here in the US, you probably will be soon. So I think it's important to understand the difference between the two and what small models are good for. So we're going to be diving into that here in a second. But before we do, as a reminder, please go to youreverydayai.com. Today's episode, there's going to be a lot of depth and detail. So if you're listening, whether you're walking your dog right now or you're on the treadmill or whatever it is, maybe you can't type down notes. So we always do that for you. I'm a human. I'm a former journalist. I write the newsletter right when I'm done with this podcast and the live stream. Also, as a reminder, y'all, this is live. A lot of people don't know this is essentially live, unedited. It's the realest thing in artificial intelligence right now. So also on the website, if you didn't know, we have more than 210 episodes or something like that now. You can go listen to every single episode, go watch every single episode, go read the newsletter that came along with every single episode. I argue we are probably the number one source for free generative AI information in the world. I don't know of a single source that has all this information. So make sure you go check it out. All right. So before we jump into what small language models are, let's first, as we do every day, go over the AI news. So Salesforce is bringing a new Gen AI option in Slack AI. So Salesforce has just rolled out a new native generative AI capabilities within Slack, including features such as channel summaries, thread recaps, and AI search. So these features aim to help users access and make sense of the collective knowledge within Slack, improving productivity and saving time. So the new AI features in Slack can save users time and improve productivity with an estimated average savings of 97 minutes per week. So these AI capabilities right now are rolling out just in the US and the UK and are right now for subscribers of Slack Enterprise plans. That's the important part. But the company is working to expand the additional plans and languages. Hey, hot take, I don't like Slack, if I'm being honest. I think, we use ClickUp. I think it's a better option for us at least. But I know so many people use Slack, and man, the noise of just Slack right now is making me nervous. All right, our next piece of AI news. Apple's latest alleged AI tool is bringing new types of creativity to everyday people. So Apple has developed a prototype AI animation tool called Keyframer that uses large language models to add motion to 2D images. All right, so it is a description-based tool that converts text prompts into CSS code to animate images and has potential applications in web-based animation. So Keyframer is a promising new tool for creating these web-based animations and just the simplicity of turning 2D images into animations. As someone that's, built and developed websites on and off for like 20 years, this is pretty exciting for me because it's not easy, right? And the capabilities to turn a still 2D photo into a moving animation with a text prompt is kind of awesome, right? So keep your eyes out on that. All right, last but not least in AI news, Google has rolled out a new coding tool for its employees. So according to reports, Google has introduced an internal AI model called Goose to assist its employees in writing code more efficiently. So this is part of Google's broader efficiency drive, which includes job cuts and team reorganizations. So this new Goose model reportedly is a plan to bring AI to every stage of the product development process and is part of Google's efforts to enhance AI skills and streamline operations. You know what? All these names are getting confusing because I thought maybe Meta was the one that was going to go down the animal route, or the exotic bird route with their emu video, but now Google is getting into the game with Goose, right? Can we just have separations? Can all can all tech companies maybe pick one genre of animal that they want to call their models so I can stop getting confused? All right. So, as a reminder, if you want more news, we do it every day, as well as, yes, we recap this show. We go over more news than this and fresh finds from all across the internet. A lot of other great information in our newsletter. So, make sure you go to that, youreverydayai.com. It's in the show notes if you're listening to the podcast as well. So, make sure to check out the episode description for those links, as well as you can email me, reach out on LinkedIn, all that good stuff. All right. So, let's get into it. And I would love to hear from our audience. Hey, Tara's always first here. Good morning from Nashville, Dr. Harvey Castro. Denise, thanks for joining us. Brian and Woozy and Mauricia, we got a crowd today. Y'all actually care about small language models. All right, I'm not the only one. Good morning to Svetlana and Raul. Thank you all for joining us. So let me know right now. I would love to know for our live stream audience, or just let me know also if you're listening on the podcast, do you use small language models? Do you know what they are? What questions do you have? I may not have every answer, right? Some of them I'll be able to answer live here on the show. So if you are joining us, please get your question in about what small language models are or what questions you have about them. But hey, if I can't get to them live, I'll make sure to answer them in the newsletter so we can all learn together. All right, so we're going to talk now about what is a small language model, and I'm going to give you 14 facts that you need to know. All right, no clickbait here, just straight facts. We bring receipts. All right, so let's start here with small language models. So it's important to know that the definition is always changing, right? As actually large language models get bigger, what we consider a small language model is always changing. So keep that in mind, all right? The goalposts are always moving in terms of these definitions, and there is no one overarching definition that everyone adheres to. So, you could even say, something that we might have considered a small language model, a large language model 2 years ago, people might be calling it a small model now. So keep that in mind. So previously, a small language model was considered a model with fewer than hundreds of millions of parameters. But now, like I said, that definition is changing a bit. So as large language models like GPT-4 get bigger and bigger, right? When we jumped up from, GPT 3.5 to GPT-4, right? As the large language models get bigger, we're starting to call other models, these are small now comparatively, right? So it's important to know. And it's all kind of judged by parameters, all right? And we're going to get into here in a second what those parameters are and what they mean. So essentially, large language models have billions to trillions of parameters, allowing complex tasks of all varieties, right? So your GPT-4, your Gemini Ultra, think of those as the ultra big boys, right? In large language models, and they can perform any task, and they essentially know everything. All right. So that's not how small language models work. Okay. Small language models have fewer parameters, making them more efficient, and they are more for specific tasks or to be used locally on devices with more limited resources, right? We're going to get into all the intricacies, but if we want to talk big picture, that's the best option, right? Or that's the best way to think of them. Large language models are the behemoths that can literally do anything and everything. And probably most of us actually use large language models like ChatGPT and Google Gemini and Anthropic Claude. We probably use large models like that more than we do small models. All right. But small models are more for specific tasks. So it's not something that you can really get the best results sitting down and asking, 100 different questions from 100 different, walks of life. That's not really what small models are for. They're fine-tuned for specific tasks. All right. Let's keep diving in. Let's look at some examples. So again, even when we talk about parameters, because I'm going to define what a parameter here is in a second, but first I'm giving some examples of large language models and small language models and their parameters, right? So a lot of times companies don't even say how many parameters their models are. So, even as I throw these numbers out there, some of them are unconfirmed, but, kind of reported to be true. So keep that in mind. So let's just look at the difference here. So as an example, large language models, probably the two most popular ones are GPT-4 from OpenAI which is reportedly about 1.8 trillion parameters. Okay. Gemini Ultra from Google, which is a reported, 1.5, 1.6 trillion parameters. All right, then let's look at some popular now small language models that maybe would have been considered big, 3 years ago, but they're not. They're small now. So Phi 2 from Microsoft is about 2.7 billion parameters. Then you have Llama as an example, very popular open source model from Meta, about 7 billion parameters. All right, don't we can pick hairs on the parameters all day. Again, those are estimates, those are reports, etc. But those are some big names out there, right? So we're talking OpenAI, Google, Meta, Microsoft. So, there's these smaller, more flexible models like Phi 2 and Llama. Then you have your big, your big ones, OpenAI's GPT-4 and Gemini Ultra. All right, so now let's talk parameters, right? Because that is essentially the difference. That's the difference. There's a lot of intricacies in how they play out differently, but the kind of the first thing that we look at to separate large models from small models is parameters. So I just gave you the examples, 1.7 trillion versus a couple billion. All right, so here's what a parameter is in very simple terms. All right, so again, I'm sure if you're a machine learning expert with a decade of experience, you might have qualms with my definition here, but we're talking to the everyday person. We're trying to simplify this. So a parameter in very simple terms, so in simple terms, a parameter in a language model refers to the variables that the model uses to make predictions. All right. And each parameter represents a concrete part of the model that can change or adapt based on the data it's trained on. All right. That's an important piece, right? Because all of these models and all of the parameters that they contained are trained, right? So which is why obviously these large language models are much more expensive to create. They're much more expensive to upkeep. They're more difficult to train, right? Because they are so much more complex, right? It's like the way I like to think of it is if you know how to work with a large language model, you can essentially ask it anything, right? In the history of existence. And if you know how to work a large language model, you can probably get a pretty decent answer. Not necessarily the case with small models, right? Small models are generally trained in different, categories of work or different, different types of outcomes you may want, right? So as an example, a small language model may be trained or built specifically for a type of customer service, right? To handle just, inquiries from customers, right? And it might be fine-tuned for a specific use case like that, right? So if you have a small model that's maybe for customer service, right? Maybe it's an open source model that you can, tweak yourself, but let's just say that, right? That small language model that's built specifically and tailored and fine-tuned for customer service to respond to customer inquiries, you aren't going to be able to code on that, right? You're not going to be able to develop a website, right? It's not going to be able to spit out images for you, right? That's what large language models do, right? It's the multimodality of large language models, right? Being able to input photos as prompts, being able to output, different types of code and multiple language, all of these things. A lot of times, small language models are not like that, right? They're built for one very specific purpose, or they are just made for smaller purposes. Like, okay, this small language model excels at creative writing, right? So can it create an outline of, how the stock market has changed over the last 30 years? Maybe, but that's not really what it's for, right? So again, different use cases, different types of training, different parameters. It changes, right? Can complete difference in what a large language model and a small language model should be used for. All right. And hey, so great question here from Woozy. So have any specific products you like that are being run entirely with small models? I do have some examples, Woozy, but I'll try to share those in the newsletter so I don't go off track here. All right. So now let's talk about 14 things that you should know about small language models. All right. And again, I think most of us, myself included, are more familiar with large language models. So as we go over some of these facts and things to know, I'm going to be comparing small models to large models, right? Because that's what most of us know, So think The large models, the GPT-4, the Gemini Ultra, the Claude Anthropic, etc., or Anthropic Claude. So some of the most important differences. All right. So small language models require less computational power, making them more accessible for users with limited hardware resources. All right. That's one of the most important things, right? These small models can live locally on devices, right? The new Samsung phones have Gemini Nano, right? Which is technically a small model, but it lives on the hardware, right? Which technically requires less compute. Because when you're using large language models, people don't like to talk about this, but they are extremely resource heavy, right? We've talked about it on the show before, right? Every couple hundred prompts, it kind of can tell you how many, what is the environmental toll, right, on all of these prompts, because large language models require a lot of compute power, uh, you know, but small language models don't because they live locally, right? So they're not having to, essentially send your query and compute it in the cloud, which can be very expensive and very resource heavy. Small models, not like that. So even with that, in the same vein, small language models are faster at training and inference due to their smaller size compared to large language models, right? They're faster, right? It's faster when there's way fewer parameters, especially when you're, obviously using a small language model for what it's good at. It's faster. It's on device. It has fewer parameters to look through, right? So think of it like this. What's technically faster? If you had to read through a 500-page book to learn about the history of everything, or a 5-page book, right? That gives you the history of things that maybe you care about. It's kind of like that, right? It's just faster. Small language models are faster, but obviously way less robust. All right, some more facts to know. Small language models are more energy efficient, which we just talked about. So they're reducing the carbon footprint associated with the training and the running of AI models. That's another part. It's not just the running, large language models that are expensive. It's the ongoing training. There's so much compute, right? That's why you have Sam Altman out trying to raise $7 trillion, yes, trillion with a T, $7 trillion for more GPUs, right? To build a new class of chips, right? Because these GPU chips power all of these generative AI models, not just your large language models, but all generative AI models are run off these very hard to get, very expensive GPU chips. So right now, we are, I wouldn't say it's a compute crisis, but all of this computing power is scarce, it's expensive, it's resource heavy, it's in the long run taking a toll on the environment. So small models, I think, in that regard, are important to keep an eye on. Also, small language models can be deployed on mobile devices and embedded systems, unlike most large language models. Yeah. So again, that's your edge AI, right, or your edge computing. So that's bringing these language models locally to small devices, right? So you're seeing it on actual, phones now, and just talked about that with the new Samsung S24 having Gemini Nano. Also, reportedly, Apple, should be announcing their generative AI offering in June at the Worldwide Developer Conference. So Tim Cook just announced that, I think it was earlier this month. So we are presumably going to be seeing a small language model in an upcoming iPhone, right? Or maybe in upcoming, MacBooks or iMacs, right? So that's another important thing to keep an eye on, is we are seeing that as well with NVIDIA's chat with RTX, right? They just announced that it was actually announced a couple of months ago, but it was just released, in the last 36 hours, NVIDIA's chat with RTX, right? So we don't know how many parameters it is, but it looks like a pretty solid, small language model that can run locally, right? You have to have a certain NVIDIA GPU running on your computer to run chat with RTX, but the same thing, so this is a big shift that we're going to see because it's better privacy as well, right? That's one of the biggest things that people are concerned about with large language models, and it makes sense, right? So not just data sharing, but training data, right? How are these companies using any data that we upload into their systems to train their models, right? So when you think of smaller models that run locally, they're not sending information back and forth, right? So it is the concept of running large language model and generative AI locally on a device. It's much more privacy, much more security, right? Just like if you're opening Microsoft Office, let's just say, and you're not connected to the internet, that's kind of what it's going to look like in the future if you're working with a small language model on your phone or on your PC or Mac once it comes out, right? We're waiting on Apple. All right, some more facts. Here we go. So, small language models are suited for real-time applications such as on-device language processing where quick responses are crucial. All right, next fact, small language models have a lower capacity for understanding complex language nuances compared to large language models, right? That's the other thing. Large language models, if you know prompt engineering 101, there's really not much in the world that you can't do with a large language model, right? You can translate languages, you can build advanced web applications by just asking, a large language model to code something for you. And you can technically build generative AI with generative AI, right? It's so the large language models are extremely complex, and they're only going to get more powerful and more robust as we see new models, right? When we see GPT-5, and Sam Altman at OpenAI has been saying, oh, it's going to be much better at reasoning. It's going to be able to rationale, more multimodal capabilities, right? So these large language models are going to get even more powerful and even more robust, right? And even right now, large language models across like MMLU benchmarks, we talk about that on the show a lot, but the current version of GPT-4 and presumably Gemini Ultra, are about 3 to 4 times better on these benchmarks like MMLU than the average human, right? So right now, large language models, for the most part, are much smarter, much smarter than any one human. All right, so that's important to keep in mind. So it's a big difference here. All right, let's keep it rolling. So another thing you need to know about small language models, they're often used in applications where speed and efficiency are more critical than deep language understanding. Again, tailored applications. Small language models can also be fine-tuned more quickly and cheaply for specific tasks versus large language models, right? Yeah, y'all, like even though GPT-4, I think it's still more powerful, at least right now, than Gemini Ultra. We might see that shift, as Gemini Ultra from Google, starts to get a little more stability and just a little bit more improved. But y'all, GPT-4 is like almost 2 years old now, right? Which is crazy to think about, right? But it's also important to know that and to see the difference, right? Presumably, OpenAI has been working on, GPT-5 for years. So these large language models are extremely expensive to create, to train, and to maintain. Right? It's like a Titanic ship in the ocean versus a jet ski. Right? You can't use a jet ski for everything, but for a specific task, a lot of times a jet ski is much better than a huge cruise ship maybe that 10,000 people can go on. Different applications, different vessels for different applications. All right, a couple more things you need to know. About small language models. And yes, if you do have questions, I'm going to try to get to them at the end. So keep them coming if you do have them. So small language models, they're much easier to maintain, obviously, and update due to their simpler architecture. Small language models can also be more easily integrated into software and web applications without needing extensive infrastructure. That's an important one. I think all these different, web applications and software early on, just jumped on, OpenAI's models because their API was good. They've been making it cheaper and cheaper and faster to work with. But I think we're going to see a shift here in 2024, maybe to a lot of these, pieces of software, these different web applications instead, using small language models. Because again, as an example, let's just say if you're building, if you're a large company and you want to, have your own version of a model for customer support, do you need a model as big as Google's Gemini Ultra or as big as OpenAI's, GPT-4? I don't know. You might be better off, as an example, with a model like Mistral or a model like Llama, right? Something that is maybe, more limited, more fine-tuned. Another thing to keep in mind, which I think is important, is large language models. People struggle with them, right? Because let me tell you this, if you're using, and I know I always, old man Wilson getting on his porch and shaking his fist at the kids who don't know what a large language model is or how to use it, right? So, so much of what you see on the internet and social media is, oh, use my prompts, use my prompts. Here's 15 prompts that'll make you rich tomorrow. Those prompts don't work. They literally don't work. That's not how large language models work. They're too big. They're too big, right? If you tell, GPT-4 as an example, you're a copywriter with 20 years of experience. That means nothing. That means nothing, for a large language model. Because guess what? It has gobbled up all of the information on the open web and closed web works of art, things that we don't even know about. It has essentially the history of humankind in its data set, in its 1.8 or 1.5, depending on what model you're talking about. Those trillions of parameters. So guess what? It's also gobbled up all this information. That's bad information, right? People that say, oh, I'm an expert copywriter with 20 years of experience. Guess what? There's a lot of people that say that on the internet that are garbage and they're not good copywriters, right? So when you're working with a large language model with trillions of parameters and you think you can use these copy and paste prompts and get great outputs, no. Would you get better outputs if you were using a small language model that is specifically trained for copywriting or creative writing? Absolutely, right? That's why I think so many individuals, so many businesses, especially early on, wrote off technologies, these very powerful and robust technologies such as, Chat GPT, GPT-4, even, Google Gemini Ultra, because they're like, oh, well, I can put one big prompt in here and it's not fantastic. It's because it's a large language model with trillions of parameters. You can't just put one prompt in and expect something great out because its brain, its big neural network is too big. It's too big. It's not fine-tuned for a very specific task. So this is just a small mini rant brought to you by Old Man Wilson. If you're working with large language models, you need to understand the basics of prompt engineering, right? You need to essentially train your chat that you're working with, right? You have to, like what Tara is saying here. This is what we teach in our free Prime Prompt Polish course that has been taken by thousands of thousands of business leaders across the world. We teach them the basics. Most people are using large language models incorrectly. They're using it like it's a small language model. It's not how it works. Sorry, rant over. Let's keep going. Small language facts you got to know. So small language models offer a balance between performance and resource usage, and it's ideal for many practical applications. All right. So good examples here. Small language models can power chatbots, they can power search engines, they can power voice assistants, whereas large language models are advanced and used for every single task.
Are you still running in circles trying to figure out how to actually grow your business with AI? Maybe your company has been tinkering with large language models for a year or more, but can't really get traction to find ROI on Gen AI. Hey, this is Jordan Wilson, host of this very podcast. Companies like Adobe, Microsoft, and NVIDIA have partnered with us because they trust our expertise in educating the masses around generative AI to get ahead. And some of the most innovative companies in the country hire us to help with their AI strategy and to train hundreds of their employees on how to use Gen AI. So whether you're looking for ChatGPT training for thousands or just need help building your front-end AI strategy, you can partner with us too, just like some of the biggest companies in the world do. Go to youreverydayai.com/partner to get in contact with our team, or you can just click on the partner section of our website. We'll help you stop running in those AI circles and help get your team ahead and build a straight path to ROI on Gen AI.
All right, last couple facts you gotta know here. You gotta know. Small language models can be used in both cloud-based services or by downloading them. Yeah, so that's the thing. You can't download a large language model. It's not how it works. I don't know if there's a single, computer, GPU, on any one physical device that you can download the entirety of, like a GPT-4. There's been people that have, forked it and they've created smaller versions of these large language models. But, for the most part, small language models, the big thing to keep in mind is yes, they can be downloaded. They can be cloud-based as well, right? So there's great resources out there. We'll mention them in the newsletter. Hugging Face is probably one of the leading resources for working with and downloading small language models, and you can run them locally on your machine, right? You don't have to be a tech expert to experiment and to download and to install large language models, because that's what they're for. They're for on device use for very specific use cases. All right, so I'm going to get to your questions here, but we're going to wrap up and I'm going to ponder with you. And let me know if you're joining me live, what do you think the future is for small language models? I'm not 100% sure, right? I talk about large language models every day. I read about small language models, use all kinds of models. So I'm very curious about what the future of small language models is. I think what we're seeing, as an example, with Samsung and Google teaming up to bring Gemini Nano to the S24 to a mobile device, that's huge, right? So I think the future of small language models actually is going to kind of rely heavily on the successes or failures of these first couple large scale commercial rollouts, right? So even if we could count on our hand a handful of, we could call them, highly visible small language models. So you have your models from Meta, right? Your Llama models, very popular right now, very popular, for people to run these models locally. Just talked about Gemini Nano. I think we also have to talk about NVIDIA's Chat with RTX, right? And you can use other models on Chat with RTX, which is great. Same thing. You can upload your own documents. We haven't even talked about the power of RAG, right? The power of RAG, which is something that is kind of tied in with these small language models. So it's retrieval augmented generation, combining with small language models. So essentially bringing in your own database of information and combining it with small language models. Then you can, I think, bypass so many of these security and privacy concerns, right? When you can work with a small model that works on a device, it's faster, it's more efficient, it's cheaper. And then if you can bring your own data in and work with it in a secure fashion, I think the future of small language models is extremely promising, right? It's almost like, I think, kind of, the large language models are kind of like the Trojan horse. It infiltrates all our daily lives, and we see how powerful they are, and we all start using them. Hundreds of millions of people are using large language models on a daily basis now. But then we are also then concerned, right? And we didn't know, I guess, like some of the best marketing maybe for small language models is large language models, right? And people using them incorrectly, because we see this robustness and how powerful models in general, language models are, right? To turn unstructured data into something that we can use and we can create with. It's extremely powerful. But we are also now, over the last 18 months, we've been exposed to the downside, right? And now we're becoming more cognizant of privacy and trust. So I think small language models, it's kind of in a wait and see, but I do see them gaining popularity, with the, Gemini Nano, with the new S24, with whatever Apple's going to be announcing, with Meta's open source local models, and also with Apple, right? Presumably, we're going to see some sort of small language model with Apple. It could be a large language model as well. It could be a combination, but presumably we're going to have some edge AI, some on-device large language model in a future Apple offering. So I do think that working more with small language models is going to be the future. All right. Let's see if we can get to a question or two, maybe a couple comments. Let's see here. So Juan says, what's your large language model of choice for everyday use, emails, productivity, etc.? Great question, Juan. I am still team ChatGPT through and through, right? At least for most of our team's needs, ChatGPT is great. Again, but we're not working as much with many other people. We're a small business, so we're not working as much with confidential documents, right? I think if we were, we might be looking at some of these small language models right now. But at least right now, I still think while plugins are there, right? Yes, OpenAI will likely be phasing plugins out soon. But right now, the ability to use what we call plugin packs, which are essentially mini agents, right? When you enable any 3 plugins at once, you can put a prompt in, and those 3 plugins can work with each other autonomously. People don't know this. People don't understand how powerful plugins are. And then you can also, with the new feature from OpenAI with the GPT mentions, and then you can only one at a time, you can have your 3 plugins almost working like mini agents in a chat, and then also mention any GPT, whether ones you create or from the GPT store. At least for me, I don't see any other large language model right now that offers that sort of flexibility. Not even Gemini Ultra right now. Not all workspace accounts have access to all of the features that Gemini Ultra has. So at least my take right now, that's the best large language model. Let's see. Tanya, can you give an example of a prompt that give the results you want? So Tanya, I'm not sure. You'll have to ask me a follow-up question. Maybe that's something we can answer in the newsletter. Tara asking, what is the best PC or Mac for tinkering with a local model? My 2018 MacBook Pro wants to retire on me. Yes, that's a good question. So you're gonna want to look at probably laptops that were honestly introduced in the last like 3 to 6 months. So we'll have a list. We'll have a list in the newsletter today. I don't have a list off the top of my head, but I do know, as an example, Microsoft did just release a new version of their Surface laptop that can run models locally. We've already mentioned a couple of phones that can run small devices locally. So yeah, we'll have a complete list of kind of different PCs right now or Macs that can run these models, because yes, you need newer devices with new GPTs or GPUs, very powerful, processing. So yeah, you're going to need probably something that's come out in the last 3 to 6 months in order to, really leverage this. All right. That's it, y'all. I hope you enjoyed a somewhat, random look, right? We kind of went all over the place on this one, but I gave you 14 facts you need to know about small language models. We talked about the big differences. We talked about what they are from parameters and the future. So if you want more on this, we're going to break it all down in our daily newsletter. So go to youreverydayai.com, sign up for that free daily newsletter. We're going to get to some of the questions we couldn't get to live and more, as well as more AI news, more fresh finds from across the web, our daily tutorial. Check it all out at youreverydayai.com, and join us tomorrow. We're going to be talking how AI is a creativity enhancer and not a creativity replacement. So make sure to join us tomorrow and every day for more Everyday AI. Thanks, y'all.
And that's a wrap for today's edition of Everyday AI. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a rating. It helps keep us going. For a little more AI magic, visit youreverydayai.com and sign up to our daily newsletter so you don't get left behind. Go break some barriers, and we'll see you next time.